King 5 has a whole team of journalists dedicated to sharing cold cases in hopes of bringing closure to families across the Northwest. Just one tip could change everything. And here to share more about the latest installment of Unsolved Northwest is King 5 reporter Sebastian Robertson. Welcome back to New Day.
Thanks for having me.
So you had quite a road trip with this story. What can you tell me about your latest Unsolved called The Bones in the Woods?
Well, at first, that's all it was. It was just bones in the woods. And, you never know where these cases are going to take you. So this is a Pierce County case, but their investigation took us to Vancouver, Washington, where the family eventually was. But it took decades to get to a family. So you're looking at video from Ashford, Washington, back in 1978. It was actually mushroom pickers that were out in the woods, and they found what they thought was human remains. So they called police. They checked it out, and they said, yeah, it's somebody, but they didn't know who it was. It wasn't until 10 years later that bird hunters found a separate set of remains. They were able to put them both together and discover that it was a human skull that had a bullet hole in it. So this went from a unidentified remains case to a murder case, and this was back in the 80s.
Is there been any break in the case?
Yeah, so the big break came with modern technology. So it was a couple of years ago. I'm sure you've heard of genetic genealogy. Mm-hmm. It kind of became it got in the news for the first time when they captured the Golden State Killer. And it's where investigators are able to obtain DNA, and then what they do is they run it through genetic genealogy databases, and they're able to work backwards. They actually use this to get to Brian Koberger's family in the Idaho murder.
Wow.
That's how they were able to trace him back to Pennsylvania. So back to this case, they get these bones from the 80s, and they're able to identify a name, William Nelson Church Jr. So this came in 2024. So they have these bones, they realize, okay, it's a person and it belongs to this gentleman named William Church Jr. They trace him back to Vancouver, Washington, and they realize this is a kid that was adopted into a wealthy family in Washington State, right on the Oregon border. He started getting into trouble in his teenage years. He went to jail for stealing a car, and then he vanishes. His is the body that was found in the woods.
Wow.
The tremendous part of this story was that they realized, oh my gosh, not only did this guy go missing, but he had a son. So investigators just a couple of years ago, Sergeant Lindsay Kierkegaard with the Pierce County Sheriff's Office is able to track his son to a man named Douglas Anderson. And this is where the story just gets incredible, because we went and talked to Douglas Anderson.
And I know you had a pretty special moment too with the son, right?
Yeah, we went and talked to him, and you think about it, this guy's in his early 50s, and his entire life he thinks, my dad abandoned me.
Oh, gosh.
So he thinks that his dad left him when he was 3, because that's the only knowledge he had. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until a couple of years ago that investigators called him and said, no, your dad, who you thought ran away, was actually murdered decades and decades ago. And this is the part that really gets incredible. You're seeing it right here. He'd never seen a picture of his father. He'd only seen a heavily photocopied mugshot of his dad. So this moment here, we were able to hand deliver color pictures, like more than a dozen of them, that Church's family gave to investigators. So just kind of through a twist of fate, we were able to hand it to him and get his reaction, seeing color photos of his dad.
What a moment. That's got to be just so fulfilling for you and the work that you guys do and the work that goes into these stories. So do you have people reaching out to you all the time for tips? How do you find these stories?
Well, this is a great example because you have what starts as just bones in the woods, and then you're able to put a name to it and then ultimately a face to it. So just by getting these these pictures out there and these faces out there, it is amazing, like the memories that this jogs and the people that call in. So yes, we do get a lot of tips. A lot of times there's stories that, somebody went missing in the 90s. This got a lot of press coverage. It was in the news, but then it kind of falls out of the news cycle, but it still stays very much alive for the families. So, we encourage anybody If you know somebody, if you've been impacted by this, reach out to us. And I mean, that's our job, but it's also the full-time job of a lot of these cold case investigators who really have almost nothing to go on in some of these cases. You know, they know we have somebody that went missing. We think it's a homicide investigation. And as technology gets better, as we're able to kind of pump these stories out there, the hope is that we get some resolution.
Absolutely. Sebastian, thank you so much for your time and the work that you do with all of these stories in your work.
Thank you.
Tremendous. And the Unsolved Northwest team has also recently covered 2 other cold cases. One called From Ashes to Answers details how a daughter's search for her estranged father ends at the site of an unsolved Mason County murder in the 1970s. The other is called Lost at Sea. It lays out the timeline of when 7 Washington State University students were lost at sea 50 years ago, despite calm waters. You can watch all of these stories on king5.com/unsolved. And if you have a tip or a story idea, just text the word TIP to 206-448-4545.